What's going on guys, Reisshub back with another video, and in today's video I want to cover the most consistent POI and Dropspot of Chapter 2 through all of the seasons so far, and that is Sweaty Sands. Let's cast our mind all the way back to Chapter 2 Season 1 and the FNCS squads. In EU, the qualifiers here were pretty interesting, being completely dominated by Andlex, 4ZR, DRG, and Noword. In the 4 qualifier weeks, in the finals they placed 1st, 4th, 2nd, and then 1st again. Unfortunately, the grand finals they didn't end up doing that great, coming 15th, but their run was completely dominated purely by a Sweaty Sands drop. To add to this, they weren't even uncontested in all of these weeks either. Now let's move on to the next season, Duos FNCS in Chapter 2 Season 2. In here there were 3 main teams that are very notable for landing here. Firstly, a team who did not end up winning the entire FNCS was Benchy Fishy and Mongrel. These guys landed here in every single qualifier and in the heats, but unfortunately didn't make it to the grand finals through the heat stage. They were contesting Andlex and Nate in the heats, but didn't actually manage to make that top slot to be able to qualify through for the grand finals. This meant that Nate and Andlex were contested by another team, which was Ice and Mosh, who they bullied so hard that they actually ended up coming dead last. And Nate and Andlex dominated this tournament, placing 1st and becoming the Duo FNCS champions. Over in NA East, Zayt and Saf also dropped here, however had it uncontested. You know that if Zayt and Saf are trying to land at 1 POI, it must be good. You gotta remember, back in this season there was mythic POIs here as well. The Shark, the Rig, the Grotto, all of these mythic POIs, and still the FNCS champions on EU and NA East both came out of a non-mythic POI, which was Sweaty Sands. The last 3 weeks of the Trio FNCS for Season 4 have been absolutely incredible to see, in particular in EU. Week 1 and Week 2 was won by Nate, Kezix and 4ZR, who dropped at Sweaty Sands. Week 3 was won by Andalex, Janice and X-Squeeze, who guess what, also landed at Sweaty Sands. Another thing to note is that before this season's FNCS, in NA East there was a large snakening where a ton of teams ended up switching around all of the players that they had on them, despite some of them still being successful teams before this. Now what relevance does this have to Sweaty Sands? Well, after this, the first night of scrims, Sweaty Sands was contested by 5 different teams. So you can tell all of the pros know how good this drop is. But what makes it so good? So let's look at the loot and what you can actually do from this POI. Firstly, there is 30 chests that spawn within the POI. The largest grouping of chests is in the main building where there's 6 here. However, outside of this, the other chests are relatively split apart, meaning that there are multiple efficient looting paths within this one POI. The main strategy that teams use when landing here is to control the main building, because this gives you the best sightlines over the entire POI, and it also gives you control of the east side of the drop, which makes it easier for you to disengage and rotate to the zone. Like I said earlier, there is more chests here as well, so landing on the east side does give you a little bit more chests, especially when you combine this with landing at the docks and the houses to the south. Something that Nate, Kezix and 4ZR were consistently doing was splitting also the house to the east, as there's a couple chests here for loot and then also a guaranteed henchman chest between Sweaty Sands and this house. On top of that, the player who lands here can get Storm Surge tags on the team who's landing Salty Springs and weaken their potential loadouts. There's also guaranteed barrels that spawn here, and there's 6 of them total, which gives 60 shield, so if you're in trios that's going to be 60 shield to all of your teammates, and also you're not going to have to use your own minis, big pots or splashes. So coming out here you have 30 chests, but really it feels like more because of way more shields than in some other POIs. In duos, if you're contested at spawn, this is actually enough to fight, which is what we saw all the way back in the Duo FNCS. So maybe for duos DreamHack, this is what we'll see. 2 teams contesting here and not actually fighting. For trios and squads, this wasn't really the case, where these teams were nearly always fighting when they were contesting each other. In particular, the FNCS Warm-Up Cup, where Kezix, Nate and 4ZR were contesting, and they were fighting against Andalex, Janice and X-Squeeze. These teams ended up placing 22nd and 24th in the warm-up, and then winning every single week of the qualifiers so far. So clearly being contested in trios in this kind of spot really wasn't working out for them, whereas in other game modes it's worked pretty well. There's also a huge amount of fishing spots that are around here as well. On the docks, there's a lot of these barrels where you can get fishing rods from, and if you notice all the way around the docks, there's a ton of fishing spots. You can even push out of here to fish a little bit more. During the Chapter 2 Season 2 qualifiers for Trio FNCS, so far we've seen a lot of the teams that are landing here consistently use this fishing as part of their strategy, and one of these players will always end up holding floppers. It's a pretty basic strategy in trios that someone always wants to be holding white heals so that they can heal off in the endgame, but the teams landing in sweaty sands also have the advantage because they are able to fish at the same time and run floppers for their endgame heal offs. Something that really isn't discussed enough is actually rotations from their specific POIs. Everybody knows that a center map position is really good. That's why the Authority, or as it's now called the Ruins, is a really great POI, because on average that first zone you're nearly always going to be inside of it and not have to rotate as far. But Sweaty Sands also has some really nice rotates and historically always has. In Chapter 2, Season 1 and 2, there wasn't Coral Cove to the north of Sweaty Sands, and this makes rotations very easy. For example, Zayt and Saf in the duos, when they won, if they had a far zone to the east, they would use a boat to rotate through the water to the north side of the map, and then take a dead side rotation all the way around this way. Back then, it was one of the very few areas of the map you could actually rotate the boat fairly safely, because most of the other places were in a kind of river where you could easily get sprayed from the side. This was a very free and fast rotate that a lot of other POIs on the map just didn't have. And back then, kind of making sure you rotated as early as possible to get that kind of high ground and center ground positions was really the meta, in particular with rotating dead side at that point. Now it's a little bit different because a lot of players have really caught on to how to get Storm Surge, which means the thresholds are way higher. A lot of the times, those teams who are landing Sweaty Sands are intentionally rotating to the north, to the east, or to the south on the dead side, but intentionally looking for a team to fight there to ensure that they get their Storm Surge tags this way. This is exactly what we've seen so far in the 3 qualifiers for FNCS trios, where the 2 trios who are landing Sweaty Sands and EU are both using the same strategy. Nate, Kezix, and ForZR are either rotating south, west, or north to just intentionally look for a fight on a team rotating to the dead side of the map. This is because there's not as many players around to third party the fight, which makes it much safer to take, and these guys are incredible fighters, so they know they can win it. On average, the teams who are on the dead side also want to stay away from people as much as possible, so they're typically going to be the weaker fighters. During Qualifier 2, they pretty much took a mid-game fight every single game and didn't lose any of them. The one that interested me the most was the one we went north into Coral Cove and picked up an elimination this way. They were still on the dead side of the map and there's barely anyone around them, as you can see by the map here. So use the dead side of the map to upgrade their pumps all the way up to the legendary one, and because they knew that no one was going to rotate into them since they'd eliminated the only team that was on the dead side of the map, they could then easily harvest their materials back and not really have to worry about players around them, and they'd already ticked off their Storm Surge damage. There's also a ton of cars within the actual POI itself, which makes rotating from there very easy. A lot of players aren't talking about how good car rotates are in duos, solos, and trios right now, and they are definitely by far the best way to rotate in the early and mid game. And obviously you've seen some clips from the end game of DreamHack solos, for example. Clearly they work in endgame as well. There's also a large amount of materials around the POI itself, and easily enough for all 3 members to get up to cap materials. The materials here are also fast harvesting, like the metal fences all the way around the skate park, and the plenty of caravans in the caravan park too. This means that if you have enough time here based on a good rotate, you can upgrade to a legendary pump, then rotate and take that mid-game fight like I'd mentioned earlier. This is the one of the reasons why they are so successful. That's because they manage to loot it very efficiently, always have shield because of the barrels that they have left there, are very confident mid-game fighters, and then take this push on other teams who are just not as confident at fighting. Overall, this POI is extremely powerful and very good. It has stood the test of time, season after season after season. I would put money on the fact that next season, whatever the meta is, if it's solos, duos, squads, trios, whatever it is, Team Rumble, whoever drops here will do well. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and learned a lot. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I've been Reisshub. Peace!